May Beavers is our speaker. She's a very principled, conservative Tennessee senator who is running for Tennessee governor. We'll be hearing more about her as the weeks go by, and we're just real pleased to have her here tonight. Mrs. Beavers.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you tonight. It's been a very interesting race so far. We've been in a little over 3 months, and you know, we try to think of where we've been, and it's hard to remember where you were the day before. We've been all over the state, but we are enjoying coming to the mountains up here. Believe me, your leaves are beginning to turn, and we always enjoy coming. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm a graduate of Trevecca Nazarene University. I had a couple of years of law school. It came down to either finish law school or run for the legislature again. So I chose to run for the legislature and ended up being chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Nobody else wanted judiciary that year, so I chaired it for 6 years. I have 2 children, 5 grandchildren, and they're the main reason I'm in this race. If you had asked me last year if I would be running for governor, I would have said no way, never even thought about it. But I had a lot of people encourage me to run, telling me that we needed a real conservative in the race, and that's why we're in it. It was an interesting year last year, to say the least. Let me go back to my House days to begin with. I served in the House, and it was during the term of Governor Don Sundquist. Everything kind of rocked along pretty well the first few years of his terms. And then in about 2000, 2001, he tried to push a state income tax. And I'll never forget walking into my caucus meeting and some of our leadership coming in and saying, it's a done deal, we're going to have a state income tax. And I thought, over my dead body, I ran against the state income tax, and not if there's anything I can do about it. At that time, Phil Valentine in Middle Tennessee, radio talk show host, had actually began to buy into the idea of the state income tax. And I called him up and I said, what are you doing? We don't need a state income tax in the state of Tennessee. I took him a budget by the station, talked about all the waste in the budget. He invited me to come on the show the next day, and I asked him if I could bring then Senator Marsha Blackburn with me. And we went in and we started talking about the budget and how we needed to make cuts, and there was a lot of waste in the budget. And he ended up getting on board with us. They summoned the people down to the legislature to honk their horns, and we killed the state income tax, or rather the people killed the state income tax. We were only an instrument to get the word out and let people know what was happening. Now, this last year, I felt very much the same way that I did back in the income tax days. When they said we're going to pass a gas tax, I thought, we can't do this to the people of Tennessee. We have a $2 billion surplus. And it's just a rule of thumb, when you're taking too much of the people's money already, you don't put another tax on them. So when they couldn't just tell everybody, well, we need better roads, so we need to pass an income tax, they said, well, we'll come up with some tax breaks. So they proposed 1 cent off the sales tax on food. What happens to the cost of food and all other goods when you go up on the diesel fuel? It's going to be passed along to the consumer, and that just makes sense, although some people tried to convince me that that wasn't true. Then another tax, they said, well, our franchise and excise tax for manufacturers is too high in Tennessee. So 25 manufacturers got a tax break on their franchise and excise tax. Now, if it was too high, we had the money to cut it, right? We had a $2 billion surplus. And then they told us, well, the whole income tax needs to be reduced. Well, last year, they had a bill that would reduce the whole income tax just a percentage. And thanks to a brave soul, Representative Mark Pody, who's now running for my seat, he stood up on the floor and he introduced an amendment. And that would gradually phase out the whole income tax and give a permanent date in which it would be phased out. Of course, he got called on the carpet for doing that and introducing it on the floor as a surprise. The Speaker of the House and the Finance Chair called him out of the room and kind of chewed him out about it, but it got done. That was going to happen this year anyway, so it's kind of disingenuous to count that as a part of the tax reduction. Of course, there was a little thing like going up $5 on your registration on your vehicle that you'll be seeing when you have to pay renewal. And then it gets higher as you get into commercial vehicles, and when they have to pay more, what happens is passed along to the consumer. Another part of it that they use to try to sell people, we'll give a better deduction to the veterans on their property tax. Of course, they'd taken it away the year before, and so that became a part of it, just trying to sell the whole thing. It passed. There were 6 in the Senate, 11 in the House that voted against it because we didn't think that we need to put another tax on people. When it came through Representative Terry Lynn Weaver's subcommittee over in the House, they tried to propose an amendment that would take 1/4 cent of the sales tax that we currently were receiving and dedicate that to roads, and it failed. In order to get the bill out of committee finally, the Speaker sent in Speaker Pro Tem Curtis Johnson to vote it out because the vote was tied with the subcommittee. One other amendment that you'll find interesting that was turned down was an amendment that would have dedicated that money just for roads. And I have to ask myself, why wouldn't they pass an amendment like that? I've always thought that there needed to be wording that when you pass a gas tax, it goes just for roads. Now let me talk about the money that we get back from Washington. We send $1 to Washington, and they send it back. Less than half of the money that we send to Washington can be used to put down roads. The rest, they tell us how to spend. They tell us we have to do walking trails, bicycle lanes. You can get a grant for a welcome center and house your Chamber of Commerce. And so I did a resolution just to point all of this out, and the House and the Senate voted it out. We sent it to Congress, to President Trump this last year, to say take the mandates off of the money that we already get for roads. Needless to say, I haven't heard back from any congressman in regards to that resolution. But that's something we need to keep working on because we have too many mandates at the state level coming from the federal government. Having served at the county commission level, I think I've realized more how what we do in the state affects the counties. I think that we need to give our school boards a little more responsibility and more choice when it comes to choosing the tests that we give our children. Now I'm using 3 T's when it comes to education in Tennessee. I am talking about teaching. We need to start teaching phonetics. We need to teach our children to read by the 3rd grade. In my administration, that will be what we do, is demand that they read by the 3rd grade. We have children. There was an article that came out this week that 6% are all of the students that we have in 3 through 8 that are proficient in English. That means 94% are not. Another part of teaching is full immersion in the English language. We have so many refugees in our school system now. I know Metro Nashville that I'm familiar with, they're always saying we need more English as a second language teachers. I've talked to teachers. They have students being put into their classrooms that can't speak any English, and they're supposed to be learning, and those children's grades are counted against the evaluations on the teachers. And I don't think anybody's ever thought about that. I've also heard now that they have interpreters to read the test questions when they take the test. And I'm like, what's wrong with this picture? You know, it used to be you came to this country, you learned the English language. And so we will propose to the legislature that we pass legislation that you have full immersion in the English language before you're put into a classroom or before you're required to take a test. And then that was the testing part of it, teaching, testing, and then transparency. You know, who's getting a cut on all of these standardized tests that we're paying over $100 million a year for? We need to let our local school boards choose whether they want the standardized testing or the ACT or SAT that we've always used, and we will push that. When it comes to education, we need more technical schools in the state of Tennessee. You know, you can give away all the free college education you want to, but let's face it, not every child was meant to go to college. And we need more choices. We need technical schools. I've visited Northeast State here with the aeronautics program, and I've talked about that all over the state. I think it's wonderful. They have found a niche. There is a real need nationwide for airline pilots and sheet metal workers and mechanics for drones and mechanics for jet engines. And they found that niche, and they're working along with Tri-Cities Airport to try to educate young people, come out in 2 years, and get a good paying job. I visited other technical schools across the state. We need more technical schools in the rural areas. If they're wanting to recruit industry to this state, other than just jobs that just pay minimum wage, we need to have people that are trained to do those jobs. And for instance, down in our school systems, our high schools are beginning to get into this too a little bit more. So many of them got away from technical training for a long time. Down in Ottawa, and I tell people I've learned to spell that and to pronounce it, but they have the Volkswagen plant down there. The school system has bought a manufacturing building, and they're going to be teaching robotics down there. It fits in perfectly. You go in for maybe 14 months, you learn robotics, and then you can get a job at the Volkswagen plant. And it fits, you know, the needs of the economy down there. So that's something we will push instead of trying to put more and more money into free education. And when it comes to education, a couple of years ago I filed a bill to do away with Common Core curriculum. We've heard lots and lots of complaints. My grandchildren have been in Common Core classrooms. Of course, they didn't pass my bill. They passed another bill that was supposed to do away with Common Core. All it did was rewrite the standards, which many people are telling me are worse than they were before. But we've got to do something about Common Core. We've got to do something about teaching to the test. We have teachers that are very talented. They want to teach, but they're not able to because they're required to teach to the test. And we have many valuable teachers that have experience that are retiring from their occupation because of this. You know, 2 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been that long, I supported President Trump simply because he started talking about illegal immigration, refugee resettlement, and terrorism. Because I felt those were the things that concerned me most, and no other candidate was talking about those issues. I think he is trying to do what he can in Washington. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a House and Senate that's working with him very well. We need to really keep him in our prayers. It's a real threat to our nation. We have so many illegals coming in here. We had hearings on the Chattanooga shootings 2 years ago, and I was on that committee. We found out that we don't get any information from the federal government on these refugees that are coming in. And let me say one thing, Governor Bredesen got us out from the refugee resettlement program as a state. And so the federal government just goes behind our backs. They start contracting with Catholic charities and other charities, paying them to bring refugees in. And then what happens? It falls on the back of the taxpayers, you know, for housing, for education, and many other things. And so, year before last, I heard that the Thomas More Law Institute had said that they would represent us free if we wanted to sue over the refugee resettlement. And I called the Lieutenant Governor at home, told him he had not heard that. He called Senator Norris, and they started looking into it. Well, first they went to our Attorney General and asked him to file suit. He turned us down, which is why I have always pushed for an elected Attorney General. We're one of the only states that does not elect our Attorney General. He is appointed by the Supreme Court, and of course the Supreme Court now is appointed by the governor. So there's no elected official that he answers to, and he is your attorney. Well, he turned us down, so we went to the Thomas More Law Center, and they have filed suit, and I've heard that, you know, we probably have the best suit that is out there, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. I'm pro Second Amendment. I am for constitutional carry. I will sign the bill, but I will not only sign the bill if I'm elected, I will encourage the legislature to pass constitutional carry. I got open carry through the Senate a few years ago with 23 votes, but it always gets stopped over in the House in the subcommittee system. It seems like they always appoint the subcommittee so that we can't get any good bills passed. I was there when when the carry permit was passed, and a lot of people are concerned. I've read on Facebook, if we pass constitutional carry, what about the permit system? Because I still want my permit because we have reciprocity with other states and I can carry. The legislation I carried didn't affect that at all. I would still want my permit so that when we travel, I would have my permit. It would be optional. And of course, your constitutional carry would only be good in the state of Tennessee to have constitutional carry. I'm pro-life. I filed and passed informed consent for abortion. I passed a bill to require hospital privileges of abortion doctors. And finally, when I did fetal homicide, and then I passed SJR 127 that became Amendment 1, the abortion amendment to the Constitution that was challenged on the way that we counted the votes by the ACLU. That has been argued before the Supreme Court, and we're still waiting their decision on that. I guess if that's all they could find to challenge it on, maybe we're in good shape. I am a proven constitutional conservative, and I want to serve Tennessee. I want to change things for the better in Tennessee. Yeah, we've got a great state, and we've kept our budget down in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways we haven't, because it has grown 32% in the last 6 years under Republicans. We've got to tighten our belt. We've got to get rid of the waste in our departments. We have a TennCare Inspector General that's supposed to be finding the fraud and abuse in TennCare, and we need to take that to every department to make sure that we get rid of the fraud and abuse in every department. We've got to get rid of the regulations on small businesses that are affecting them. This last year, we had the Trump headquarters, and one of our helpers was a lady who was getting ready to open a veterinary clinic behind the building. This building was being redone. They never had a drainage problem. You know, it was kind of downhill. But the Department of Environment and Conservation required her to dig a moat around the building with special blend of sand and soil and a mulch that's very expensive, I understand, and plants. And she told us it's collecting water now. She has mosquitoes, but it cost her $25,000. And for a small business owner, that's too much, especially if it's unnecessary. We will review all of those regulations and make sure we get rid of the ones that we don't need. I've had a developer say that I can't afford to dig a $500,000 pond for a 42-house subdivision. I can't make any money. So we need to review all of those unnecessary regulations. My first thoughts were that's an EPA regulation. No, it's a Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation regulation. It's kind of unbelievable to me. But when I'm elected, we will hold the line on taxes. We will hold the line on regulations that are hurting small businesses and do what's right for the state of Tennessee. And I'll open the floor for questions if you have any.
How about the yes on vote? Could you give us a little bit more of what's happening on that, on the abortion?
Well,
is all of our legislation for abortion can't happen now? Is that what's...
They're just challenging the yes on one that put the abortion language into the Constitution. just based on the fact that the numbers were based on how many votes were cast in the last gubernatorial race, and the ACLU said we didn't count the votes right, and therefore we didn't, pass muster on the way we counted them.
But we're stymied as far as passing any legislation, is that right? Or is it just the Republican Party won't do anything?
No, we can still pass abortion legislation. We've been doing it all these years. But we just wanted something in the Constitution to keep the Supreme Court from overturning every piece of legislation that we pass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
The Islamic issue in our schools. I thought the United States Supreme Court ruled that it could not be taught anymore.
I think there's a fake news article out there, I've been told. I've read that article. I wish it were true. And maybe somebody else can comment on that further, but I saw that just yesterday. Somebody thought it was wonderful and said, is that true? And 2 people came on there and said it's fake news. Let me talk a little bit, though, about that as far as, teaching Islam in our textbooks. I can assure you that NMA Beavers administration will appoint a textbook committee that will make sure that history is in our textbooks, that we're not teaching another religion in our textbooks, that will make sure our kids know the Constitution. That'll be one of the things of being governor, is being able to make those appointments where we can make some changes. Homeland Security, as I told you, is a big concern of mine. We will revamp the Homeland Security Department in Tennessee. It was alarming to me to know that after the Chattanooga shootings, our National Guard could not carry, I'm talking men that are trained to defend us, to defend themselves. They couldn't even carry their firearm in a recruiting station. We had to pass a law to get that done. And then they require them to buy their own firearm. That's a disgrace when they're giving their time and effort to try to defend our state, and they're not allowed, and country, because they can be called up, that they're not allowed to carry their firearms. We also found out in those hearings that we have students coming here on visas. They're going to places like Tennessee Tech, all of ETSU, places like that, and they come here on a visa. They disappear after a week or a month, and nobody knows where they've gone. There's no accountability. There's no reporting. We had to file a bill to require the presidents of those colleges and universities to keep up with those people and report when they go missing and don't attend classes. I'm very concerned about a lot of things with our Homeland Security, and I can assure you that will be one of our top priorities, is to protect the people of Tennessee. I see it as just as much the governor's job to protect Tennesseans as I do the president's job to protect us. And I think that Homeland Security is a huge problem. And with Tennessee, with all the roads running, the interstates running through Tennessee, we have Oak Ridge. We need to pay plenty of attention to that.
I have an online question. If you're elected, how will you ensure you don't fall into being in the swamp?
Because I have been there for 22 years. I resigned to run for governor. I'm not using my position to run, but I have a proven record, and I think anybody that you talk to on the Hill will tell you that I have not fallen into the swamp yet, and I don't intend to.
Speaking on Homeland Security, did y'all not pass a bill here not too long ago that illegals can be on police force?
Yes, let me talk about illegals a little bit. We've had several bills that I disagreed with. In-state tuition for illegals. There was another bill that a legislator in Davidson County passed that allows police forces to hire non-citizens enforcing our laws. What's wrong with this picture? So, there's been a lot of things, and you think we have 2/3 majority, and we're doing this kind of thing. Yeah.
That became law.
Yes.
The governor signed that.
I don't know if he signed it or just let it become law, but yes.
I got one more question. It has to do with the gas tax. Has any of our legislators, have they made any money off, like a Doss, did he make any money off the deal when it comes to the gas tax?
The chairman of transportation in the House builds roads, and he's done some subcontracting, I understand, from what I've read online. He's done some subcontracting from some of that money to build roads.
I think we wanted to maybe clarify the difference between somebody that's in the country legally and somebody that's in the country legally obtaining a job. I want to clarify the big difference there.
There's a big difference in illegals and refugee resettlement, yes.
And people that have actually come here legally there that haven't, that they're entitled to be here. Well, they wouldn't be citizens yet.
Right. But we need more screening. I'm very concerned about what kind of screening they're getting before they come to this country.
I'm not in favor of non-citizens holding law enforcement positions. Just want to clarify the difference between somebody that's here illegally and somebody that's here legally from another country that's not yet a citizen or anything like that. But I have to agree that there's not many areas in the governing of our laws that we don't need to take a very close look at and see where the train has jumped the tracks and what we need to do to right the ship. And, without using all the cliches, that's the boat we're in.
That's right.
Well, what
That's right.
can we do about that? Okay, you said that they can circumvent us by going through all these charitable groups. Is there anything that we can do?
I think a governor needs to be a real leader when it comes to Homeland Security, when it comes to working with our congressman, with our president.
What did Madison do? You said he
well,
put a wall up, and how come we're not using that now?
Well, he just said the state will no longer be involved in refugee resettlement. The state was getting paid to bring them here. So they go around behind our backs and start contracting with private entities to bring them in.
We can't do anything about that.
We have sued over it, and that's about all we can do right now. But we've got to appeal to our federal government, our congressmen, our U.S. senators, to straighten that situation out.
Can we not make it illegal?
Well,
to resettle somebody who doesn't belong here? Is there any way of doing that?
We could pass laws all day long, but as long as the federal government is in charge of refugee resettlement, they're going to have a say over it. But you need a governor that's a leader in that area, and is concerned about Homeland Security, and is concerned about who's coming into our state and whether or not they're being vetted.
Another online question: if you're elected, are you going to try to repeal the gas tax?
I have pledged that I will roll back the gas tax. That'll be part of my first budget proposal to roll it back. And people say, well, you don't have the power to do it. That's true. You know, the legislature has to vote on the budget, but when there has been a tax cut that's been proposed in the governor's budget, I've not seen the legislature turn it down, especially when we have a surplus. We had a $770 million surplus at July 1st at the end of the fiscal year. We're on track for another $1 billion this next year. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Are a lot of the jobs that with the state of Tennessee being phased out to contract workers?
There has been a big move to, in fact, there's a maintenance contract that went to LaSalle in Chicago, and I'm like, doesn't anybody in Tennessee clean buildings and repair buildings? And so that's
So
being
therefore you're not in favor of contracting Tennessee jobs?
I'm not in favor of contracting all of that work out of Tennessee. And especially with what I've seen this last year with cleaning the legislature, it's been dirtier than I've ever seen it. Yes, sir.
Is there any chance of getting the E-Verify system active to the point to get rid of the illegals?
Well, we passed that legislation several years ago, and it is against the law for an employer not to run them through the E-Verify, but there's still a lot of it going on. I hear about it.
How's that being enforced? I mean, once you pass that particular legislation, let's say the E-Verify, how is that enforced?
Maybe Tony can remember the enforcement. I don't really remember how we were to enforce it.
It's a state law, I mean, it could be enforced by TBI or local jurisdictions. The problem is just like cigarette throwaway laws passed in 2008, 208, they just ignore it. So it's not, they're not interested in it. So it's really the local jurisdictions are the ones that pick that up. It's there, it's on the books, it's prosecutable right now. They choose not to do it. The governor can put additional pressure on TBI to do that.
And the Department of Labor should have a lot of say in that too. They have to pay into workers' compensation and everything, but they're getting around that. They're just not doing it. They're paying cash. At least that's what I hear.
I mean, I understand that the budget, the state's budget has grown almost $8 billion in the last number of years. What in the world did we spend that money on? You know where it got expanded?
This last year they gave raises. 57 million of it went to expand Tennessee Promise. When Tennessee Promise passed, it was supposed to come out of the lottery money, and I have questions as to whether or not we could really, do with that with the lottery money. It was supposed to go for scholarships for students that made good grades, and now we're giving it away to students who may not be making such good grades, but they're getting free college education. I'm anxious to see what the outcome of the Tennessee Promise is, how many of those students actually finish their 2 years with Tennessee Promise, and I think that's going to be very telling in the long run.
Got one more. You and I worked hard on legislation concerning synthetic drugs. What's the atmosphere in Nashville for opioid abuse issue, and what can you do?
Well, let me say this, as I've traveled the state from east to west, that's what employers talk the most about. I can't find anybody to hire. Half of them are on drugs. And we've got to do something about it. We've been known as one of the largest drug-using states in the country for a long time, and that's not anything we should be proud of. I can tell you in a May Beavers administration, we'll get all the players together. I know that the pharmaceutical companies have been sued by, I think, 2 district attorneys over here in East Tennessee. But I think we've got to get all the players involved. The doctors have some responsibility there, the pharmaceutical industry. We've got to find out what part TennCare plays in that. I think they play a huge part. I think when they took the 3 prescription limit off of TennCare, that's when I started getting calls that we have some people on TennCare in Lebanon that every week when they get their prescriptions, they're going to the streets of Carthage and selling those prescriptions. So it's something we've got to get a handle on. And it's interesting the comments that I'm reading about that on Facebook and different areas, like, well, I just want you to be sure, those of us that need the painkillers, that we're able to get those painkillers. I don't know what's going on in this country anymore, honestly. Why are we using so many opioids? Are there that many people hurting? Are there that many people that just can't deal with life? And I know people that are hurting, there's a real need for them sometimes. But I can tell you, when we had to put my mom in a nursing home 2 years ago, we moved her out of her apartment, and I had a whole bag full of drugs, because most of the time when the doctor gave her a prescription, she couldn't take them for some reason. And I'm like, why does he keep giving her all of this? Now, I will say she was of the mindset, too, that when she went to the doctor, if she didn't get a prescription to help her with the problem that she was complaining about, she called me and complained. So I think the expectations of drugs are kind of overrated right now. To me, when I hear the advertisements on TV and I hear the side effects, I'm like, why would anybody take this? But regardless, some people hear those advertisements and all they hear is, it'll help the problem that I have right now, and they'll go ask for that prescription. So it's a real problem we've got to deal with. We met an employer over in La Follette, and he was telling us how he couldn't hire anybody. So he started going and helping people as they came out of jail, help them get over their addiction. He trained them, and now he's got a very successful business just building trailers to go on the back of motorcycles. We have a faith-based program at our church called Crossbridge, and they raise money. They're 501c3. They are helping men and women as they come out of jail in Nashville, and they're giving them a place to live. They're helping them overcome their addiction. They give pearls to the women if they are clean after 1 year, and they've been very successful. There's a similar program over in West Tennessee that's doing the same thing. It's a faith-based program. And I know the Nashville scene, which Tony's familiar with, is not a very good news source in Nashville. But after I started talking about the faith-based programs, they said, oh, well, May Beavers thinks Jesus is the answer to the opioid problem. And I said, well, while that's true, that's not all that I said. I think they do have a place in that. When I was chairman of Judiciary, I worked very closely with Judge Norman in Nashville. He started the drug courts in the state of Tennessee. They've been very successful in helping a lot of people get off of drugs. I think we need to expand the drug courts to every county in Tennessee and try to help solve this problem.
Today, you know, the Knoxville paper had an article on judges wanting more money for courts.
There was an article in the News Sentinel today about they're asking more money for indigent representation in Tennessee, and that was one thing that we addressed when I was chairman of Judiciary, and I was always asking when they would ask for more money, how do you determine whether a person is indigent or not? And come to find out that many judges just ask, or they're not really looking at the tax returns. They really don't know. And I know we have a judge present tonight, and I'd love to hear from him on it if he has any. I'm sorry?
Are you kidding me? I don't see anyone in my court. I ask him what your tax return shows last year, usually as a joke, because they involve it. I would say 90. Tomorrow, out of 46 cases I've got on the docket for domestic violence, there'll probably be 2 lawyers there. One of my problems is, you know, this is the lawyer talk. It's been the same 20 years. And I bring in an interpreter, which I have to bring in every once in a while. They get $125 for that. I have to look at that lawyer who spent 3 years in law school, got dead out their ears. You're not going to get to about a third of that. And public defenders in a area like ours, you see the same people all the time, and you see the same families. Well, they're conflicted out. You know, they can't represent one side one week and the other side the next week. So we have to appoint private attorneys. And other things here is with the levels they are, you know, like death penalty cases, which, you know, unfortunately, I'm in favor of that death. I wish there's a way we could put them, I don't care whether they suffer, I mean, who's to put them so they can put them in place, not painful. But lawyers no longer get death penalty qualified, because a lawyer would write a check and give it to the state, say, leave me alone. Because once you get a death penalty case, it's a life case. You're in there until they file that. There comes a point when they file the claim against you, then you're out. But I mean, it's what we're paying lawyers to do. Things is ridiculous. Now, if I'm the legislature, that's probably one of the last things I'm thinking about is paying lawyers more money. I understand. But you know, it's something that hasn't been changed in years and years and years, and it's hard to look lawyers in the face and say that interpreter over there is getting 3 times what you're getting. Well, I guess they should have went to school to learn Spanish instead of law.
Is that a state law?
Are these citizens that can't speak English?
Well, you know, these are people that are here in this country. You know, and some of them are. I'm sure some of them probably are. You know, and have driver's license, which you didn't know you could get driver's license. You know, because, you know, but,
Do we don't even check if
But
they're
your
citizens.
Well, only
interpreters,
you can only get a driver's license if you're here on a visa. If you're here legally, you can't get one if you. Well, and
anyway, well, I mean, I'll let you talk, but all I'm saying is that's, that's a big thing for the Supreme Court right now, because they're wanting lawyers to do more and more and more pro bono work, and that's part of being a lawyer. I did a lot of it, and a lot of lawyers do. That's something I always say doctors have much better PR people than lawyers do, because but how many, you have a lot of doctors that do free work, but compared to lawyers and doctors, it's not even close.
Well,
lawyers do, it's unbelievable how much free work that attorneys do.
yeah, my concern was we had judges telling us, well, we just ask them, and if you ask, sometimes they're not going to, really tell you what all they're paying for.
Yeah.
We just wanted to make sure that they were truly indigent.
Right, you're absolutely right, but like, you put them under oath, they fill out a form, I sit there and kind of like, I go over it. I ask them, I just don't take their word. We ask them, but they're on SSI, which the law says is not income. They can't even be forced to pay child support. Or, they're on Social Security disability. And, if they work, the level is $18,000. That's the income. Most people around, a lot of them are working 40 hours, not making money. So they are entitled to the 20 that they have. It's a tough problem. I just think the level ought to be raised because it's been so. I don't think some ought to be done with the legislature every year, every other year, but 20 is about time.
Well, they need to put some guidelines with it too, as to what.
I think it should only be for people that are truly interested.
Right.
Of course, the state is paying the public defender's program. It's like somebody was talking not long ago. We pay the district attorneys to try to put them to death, and we pay the lawyers to try to punish them. Pay both sides.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for letting me talk to you tonight. I would appreciate your help. You can go to my website, may4tn.com. We have some volunteer cards, bumper stickers, handouts over here, and I would appreciate any help you could give us. Thank you very much.